All right. It's time for BuckeyeGrove Instant Access.
It's about time.
With the latest breaking news, analysis, and much, much more from around the world of Ohio State. Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com and the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You're so money and you don't even know it.
Let's move quickly and hand it off to our host, Kevin Noon.
It's time to start running!
Welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. It is Monday, a snowy Monday here in Pickerington, Ohio. Hope it's warmer where you're at, anywhere out there in Buckeye Nation. We are coming off of an odd weekend, but it shouldn't be unfamiliar. Ohio State had another game canceled, this time against Illinois. We will talk about that here in a second. And in segment 2, we will bring in Jake Spiegel of BuckeyeGrove.com to talk about some college basketball recruiting. A big weekend for the Buckeyes, landing Bruce Thornton on Friday. What does that mean? What's coming up? All of that will come up in the second segment. But, I want to jump in and welcome in our guest. And he is somebody that anybody who is a big college sports fan should be very familiar with. He happens to be a good friend of mine. Bill Bender of the Sporting News. He's also relatively a neighbor of mine, so you would think that in a town like this we would bump into each other a little bit more, but we don't. But Bill, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's because you're on the north side, right? This north central Pickerington rivalry. No, I'm kidding. I appreciate you having me on. It was I hope you had a great Thanksgiving weekend. I know we did. It's one of the bizarre college football weekends again when you watch the Iron Bowl and Ohio State, Michigan isn't across from it, but as I've said all along, you just kind of got to adapt one day at a time. I know that's a coaching cliche, Kevin, but we can go from there.
Exactly. I think across Division I FBS football, there were 19 games that were affected one way or the other this week, either with straight up cancellations, postponements. We're even starting to see situations of where you're having those 11th hour change of opponents or whatnot. So this is something that's very real, but, in terms of, for this show, everybody who's listening, I believe is an Ohio State fan. I mean, I would assume so. So, that's their concern. I'd made it all the way to Champaign. I was pulling into the parking lot of my hotel when the news came out about Ryan Day and his positive COVID test. And then we're like, we're here. We've already gone 5 hours, so we may as well just kind of ride it out because the plan was still for them to try and play. And then it was about, I was already on Central Time at that point. I think it was after 10 Central when the news came out that they were going to shut it down. So, it certainly is creating a lot of strife amongst Ohio State fans, but more importantly, concerns for everybody who's affected around the program and whatnot, as it seems to be a fairly significant outbreak.
Yeah, for sure. I can walk you through my Friday night. I watched Home Alone 2 with my wife and kids, and my kids probably laughed a little too much at the things that Kevin McAllister did to Harry and Marv there, so that was a little worrisome. And I'm getting ready to go to bed, and Ohio State cancels. And as I'm kind of sifting through the details of what that meant while you were in Champaign, I'm watching Oregon lose to Oregon State in the last minute. That was a double barrel shakeup to the playoff in some ways, because you started to worry about what Ohio State, would they meet this 6-game requirement? Northwestern was sitting there undefeated at the time, really shook up the entire Big Ten. I think the Pac-12 got eliminated with the Oregon loss if USC or Washington also loses. But this debate just sparked right away about Ohio State. I think one of the things some people on social media are forgetting that we know is that no matter what, the Buckeyes will probably play on Big Ten championship weekend, whether that's in Indy or at home against an Iowa or Wisconsin. To me, it's important because I think if they get 6 games, this is just me, I think if they get 6 games, it's a big enough sample to say, hey, they belong in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and we get to that, there's the 6-game rule, or it's being called the 6-game rule. Really, it's an average of amount of games played or whatnot within the Big Ten for Big Ten championship game eligibility, and Ohio State is sitting at 4 with 2 to go. And if we really look at the math, and I was told there'd be no math involved, but if we really look at the math, the chances of that number sliding to 5, it's kind of like golf fans watching, hoping that the cut moves so their favorite golfer will be able to play on the weekend. And I don't think that the line is going to move this time. It's going to have to stay at 6 if this rule stays in place, meaning Ohio State would have to play at Michigan State and then home against Michigan. What are your thoughts about this rule? I mean, again, we're dealing with a conference that already said we're not going to revisit this decision. We are not going to play in the fall. Well, we're playing in the fall. They revisited a decision at that point. Could they revisit a decision at this point? Does it sit there and look like they're trying to protect Ohio State and maybe to a lesser extent Wisconsin, even though Wisconsin already has a head-to-head loss to Northwestern? I mean, could we see something happen there? And is this rule like a rule that's written maybe in the best of intentions but written poorly?
Correct. And I think that's where, if Ohio State does not play against Michigan State this week and they end up 5-0, and they, and you look at Indiana, they got a head-to-head win against Indiana. Let's say Indiana loses this weekend to Wisconsin and losing Michael Penix Jr., that's very possible. I think it is another opportunity for Kevin Warren to step in and say, so what do you want as a conference? Do you want on noon Northwestern versus Indiana, with Indiana playing because the Buckeyes cannot play because of the arbitrary rule that was set up? I think that's the wrong message. I mean, you could go Ohio State and either Wisconsin or Northwestern, generate more viewers, generate more interest, probably protect the Big Ten's interest as far as the college football playoff goes, and ensure that the Buckeyes, I mean, would it look like they're protecting the Buckeyes, Kevin? Yeah, but who cares? I mean, and that's coming from me just as an objective person that watches this whole thing playing out. I mean, in some ways, the ACC can protect Notre Dame and Clemson over the next couple weeks. I think the SEC has done a fantastic job for all the things that people don't like about the conference. They've done a great job with their scheduling and their flexibility. And, Alabama might play Arkansas next week. They might not. But I think all of those things add up to they're going to have one playoff team for sure.
So, I mean, yeah, it's a crazy situation. I mean, we even saw stuff going into the NFL this week. Denver not having any quarterbacks, completing one pass in the game. I mean, we're really in uncharted territory. But to jump back into college football, and especially the Big Ten, what are your thoughts on this 21-day rule? I mean, we see a lot of conferences that are between 10 and 14 days from the time of a positive COVID test, a diagnosis, to the point you can return. Ohio State and the Big Ten are faced with a 21-day rule where 7 days is kind of a ramp-up return, additional testing for the heart condition, myocarditis. A lot of experts have kind of walked back and said they're not even testing for myocarditis after that because it's not really prevalent enough to warrant it, as people are of course calling me during this podcast. What is your thought there? I mean, I know Barry Alvarez came out earlier in the season and said that it could be something that's revisited, but that it's got to be something with the medical community. Ohio State very involved there, as Dr. Jim Borchers is, kind of a spearhead on the medical wing of the Big Ten decision makers. Where do they go from there?
With this virus, nobody really knows. And that's why I think the 21-day rule, while, again, with the best intentions, you're seeing other conferences go with 10 to 14. Guys come back. Most of the schools in the SEC and ACC that have gone on pause have come back and they're fine. There's obviously been cases. I think, one team that stands out is Florida. They took a giant break after a loss, and that could have been it for the Gators, but they come back. There hasn't been any issues since. And they're kind of that one team outside of the top four that, to me, can still play their way in if they beat Alabama. So it can be done. And I think just the timing with the Big Ten, as everybody knows, I don't need to parrot it again, but when you have no bye weeks within the schedule, it left no flexibility. Something like this was bound to happen, and unfortunately, it happened to Ohio State. If you're asking me, unless you know something I don't. I have serious doubts that they play this week because of the standard that happened with Wisconsin and Maryland when they had to go on pause. But to me, again, it's irrelevant. If they go 5-0, 6-0, and they beat everybody on their schedule, to me, that's enough to warrant playoff consideration. Some people don't feel that way, and I don't know why not.
Yeah, you got to wonder on the people who don't feel that way. I mean, obviously, if it's with fans, they have their own rooting interests. They just don't want to. It's easy to hate teams that have been successful. So anything that is, bad for Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, those types of schools are just not going to want. But we certainly have seen a wide variance of opinions out there in terms of the national media. I'm not gonna really thrust too far into that. I mean, but there certainly was a time where it seemed like the Big Ten was doing the right thing by not playing football, and everybody else was doing the right thing by playing football. So it really feels kind of uneven out there. But I guess uneven is the term we need to use right now when you look at standings in the Big Ten, and you've got teams like Wisconsin who are 2-1. You've got teams that are, already have 6 games in the books. I mean, it's going to be difficult, I guess, in terms of setting that all up. If we see more cancellations, I mean, there seem to be some rumors coming in out of Ann Arbor right now that they're dealing with the, some COVID issues right now. We don't know. We think we have this figured out, and then things are changing, not daily, but hourly.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, off the field, all of that's going on. And then on the field, the Big Ten football, aside from Ohio State, has been turned upside down in a lot of ways. You watch Michigan and Penn State bottom out, and in Ann Arbor, obviously, they may have a coaching question at the end of the season. I don't think Penn State's going to move on from Franklin, not less than 365 days after they signed a massive extension. But stranger things have happened. Indiana's success tempered now by losing their best player to a leg injury. Northwestern, we've seen that run before, but for them, they have a golden opportunity to really force this debate with Ohio State and keep winning, and then they go to East Lansing and lose when Peyton Ramsey throws 3 interceptions. It's been really hard because I'm so used to like the standard storybook, the way the Big Ten works. And there's been no ebb and flow to that other than Ohio State, who, if you're asking me this, I think they are one of the 4 best teams in the country. There are some issues on the back end that were exposed against Indiana. But when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country, which they do, which Clemson does, which Alabama does, and I would argue you may mock this a little bit. I think Notre Dame's legit. I think this is their best team under Brian Kelly. I don't know if they're good enough to beat an Ohio State or an Alabama, but in theory they should be. They went out and beat Clemson.
Yeah, they absolutely did. I'm probably not a big believer in Notre Dame. I just don't trust Ian Book. I just don't. But yeah, they were able to go out, and it wasn't like Clemson just came out and laid over in that game. They played well. Clemson played well, and Notre Dame was able to edge them out. And if all things go the way that they should, we should see the rematch in the ACC championship game. But I'm not taking anything for granted. You're listening to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Bill Bender of the Sporting News. I got two more questions. You look at the Big Ten West, and you got Northwestern now sitting at 5-1, Iowa at 4-2, Wisconsin at 2-1. Do you think that if Northwestern stumbles again, and that brings Wisconsin back into being a viable, Western champion in terms of just record or whatnot, because, Wisconsin has to get over the head-to-head loss to the Cats. Do you think that if you have both of your teams, your Eastern champion and your Western champion, who are both ineligible for the title game, do you think that puts even more pressure on Kevin Warren and the decision makers? Or, I guess maybe I'm just of the mindset that we've seen them just locked down with such stubbornness through this whole situation that I have little faith that maybe they're going to see the light.
Right. And if I was the Big Ten commissioner, and man, we'd be in trouble if I was. But I think in that event, if you don't make Wisconsin, Ohio State, the conference championship game, and you're going to end up having to play it on campus somewhere, you're just going to run the risk of being mocked even more than you've already been mocked all off season anyway. So if you don't do that, and I'm not a wrestling guy, I apologize, Kevin, I'm not. But then why would, if you're going to set up this weekend the way that they have, you set it up like a Survivor Series or have all these undercards, but that Wisconsin-Ohio State game would have to be the heavyweight fight. And if that means you have to scrap the game in Indy, that's fine too. And Kevin Warren said it himself, that the entire season is fluid. And these last 2 weeks, it's going to be very fluid. You know what I mean? So I think they've just got to see how it pans out on the field. If Ohio State can get back out there, do what we all anticipate that they're going to do against Michigan, even if they can't play against Michigan State, that possibility should be out there. Because again, from the committee standpoint, what game would they be watching? Northwestern and Indiana and Indianapolis, or the other game, wherever they're playing it, between Wisconsin and Ohio State. And that's a no-brainer.
Exactly. I agree with you 1,000%. I'm going to end on this, and we're going to go bigger picture Big Ten. I'm going to name 4 teams. You tell me who's the biggest surprise and why. Rutgers sitting at 2-4, and honestly, probably should be 3-3. Michigan at 2-4, Penn State at 1-5, or Nebraska at 1-4.
I'll go with a tie. I think Michigan and Rutgers would be my answer. Penn State had a lot of things happen that I don't want to call them excuses, but when you lose Journey Brown, Micah Parsons, lose your opener, short season, it's easy to bottom out. I think they get kind of they're calling them kind of the pandemic pardons. You can give them one. They'll probably be fine going into next year. Rutgers is way more competitive than I thought they would be in year one with Greg Schiano. They played that way in the second half against Ohio State. He should be able to recruit in that part of the country. And maybe they get to the point where they were when they had him the first time, and they make it interesting in the Big Ten East versus teams. Michigan, I'm surprised at the depth in which they have bottomed out. And I'm saying that from the defense being objectively awful. I mean, everybody's scoring, having their best game against them. Rocky Lombardi and Sean Clifford and Michael Penix have all lit them up, to the inconsistency at quarterback play, to how they looked in the opener, to now we're talking about, is Matt Campbell their next coach? And all of those things are very surprising over a 6-week span, especially when you considered how they looked in the opener against Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you look at Nebraska and the problems they've had there in terms of they just haven't been able to get much out of the quarterback position. They certainly still haven't figured things out on defense. You just have to wonder if the Scott Frost experiment, if there is a payoff at the end, or, I said before Nebraska played its first game in this conference, it was going to be very difficult for Nebraska to be Nebraska, no longer having the recruiting territories of Texas and Oklahoma and having to try and compete in this conference with no natural recruiting land. So, it's.
Yeah. Kevin, as you know, I have a 9-year-old son running around every Pickerington sport there is, and I've explained to him what 94 and 95 Nebraska was, and it's generally a short explanation. I always tell them they didn't have to throw because they didn't have to. They just ran people over, and their identity is so closely tied to the Big 12 that they've never really been able to establish that in the Big Ten. Because if you talk to people in Columbus or Ann Arbor or Happy Valley about Nebraska, I still think Nebraska is treated like a Big Ten outsider. I would look for that to continue. And you wonder what their ceiling truly is in the Big Ten. I don't think it's very high.
Absolutely. And, I know that I talked to some Nebraska fans who, they're like, well, do we go back to the Texas conference? They got away from the Big 12 because they felt that Texas had too much weight over there, but they certainly don't feel like they have an equal share in terms of the Big Ten. So it creates a lot of issues. But I want to thank Bill for being part of the show here in segment 1 of the BIA podcast. Any final closing thoughts before we jump to our break?
Just take it a day at a time. And I know like you said, you got a lot of Ohio State fans on here. The best way for them to get in the playoffs is just to win the games, whatever they play on the schedule, and look good doing it. And I think that would be good enough to get them in that top 4. If I had, and it's been a tough year covering the sport, Kevin, if they can make it happen, and I don't know how they do, an Alabama Clemson in the Sugar Bowl and a Notre Dame Ohio State Rose Bowl would be a heck of a start to 2021. I think we need to make that happen.
I agree 1,000% from your lips to God's ears, as they say. But I want to thank you, and we will switch gears to basketball on the other side of this quick break. Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I want to thank Bill Bender of the Sporting News for joining us in segment 1. And now we turn our attention to basketball, and more importantly, basketball recruiting. And for those of you who are members at Buckeye Grove, you've had the opportunity to see the work of Jake Spiegel already on the site. But to those of you who only listen to the podcast and who have not had the opportunity, one of the rising stars in this industry, we're really excited to have him. And if you're not a member of Buckeye Grove, you have no excuse right now. Jump on our Cyber Monday sale right now. Use the code Nike75. Get your first year for $75 plus a $75 gift card to Nike, either online or retail. Once again, that is gift code Nike75. Act now. It won't be here long. Cyber Monday special. But enough of me trying to pay the bills around here. I want to welcome Jake into the show. And Jake, how you doing, man?
Doing good, Kevin. Thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about some basketball today and a little bit about recruiting, a little bit about the team. They're off to a pretty good start so far, so excited to be on.
Absolutely. And, let's just get right to the big news that had happened within the last couple of days, and that was the commitment of Bruce Thornton, 2022 point guard out of Milton, Georgia, to longtime Ohio State fans. They'll remember that's the same school that produced Shannon, or the same city that produced Shannon Scott. A bit of a surprise, if you will, about Ohio State landing him. I mean, maybe not to Chris Holtmann and the staff, but I think a lot of people had kind of written off Ohio State's chances a little bit there.
Yeah. Bruce Thornton, he's the best recruit Chris Holtmann's landed since coming to Ohio State. He's number 17 overall in the Rivals 150 for the 2022 class. He's a top 5 point guard, pretty much consensus across that class. But a lot of people were surprised by that, myself included. I'd been following this recruitment for a long time because I'd seen him last year in let's see, it would have been January. I saw him flying to the hoop. He played Pick North. Milton ended up losing that game, and actually, as you said, it is the same high school Shannon Scott went to. But so Pete, there was a lot of buzz there about him. He was just a sophomore at that point. Everyone was talking about sophomore from Milton who's got 15 or 20 offers. And then as I started working with Buckeye Grove this summer, I dug more into his recruitment. And Ohio State had always been on his list, but nobody had ever really thought much about their chances of landing him because he'd taken visits to Georgia and Alabama before the dead period went on for it'll be about an entire year by the time spring comes around. So his dad also played football at Georgia, so I think a lot of people thought there was a lot of traction pulling towards those SEC schools. But he cut his list to 5 2 Mondays ago, then committed to Ohio State on Friday, and I think Coach Holtmann and Coach Pedon, I think they knew a little bit more than the rest of us there because they haven't offered any other point guards in that class besides Sky Clark, who's committed to Kentucky since, but they'd held off on offering guys like Paul McMillan and Sean Jones. So I think they might have knew for a while there that they had Bruce and had a really good shot, unlike a lot of us knew. So.
And so important with the point guard position. I mean, I know we're getting into, everybody wants to talk about it being a positionless game, and, everybody's got to be able to be kind of a, jack of all trades. But, we sit there and we look at even maybe the current iteration of the Buckeyes, and it's always the question, who's going to run the offense? Who's going to bring the ball up the court and all this stuff? And, you sit there and you get kind of a plug and play guy once Thornton gets here. I mean, I guess a lot of it depends on what the makeup of the team is at that point. But, I think that the two positions I hear the most about from fans when I talk to them about Ohio State basketball is who's going to run the point and can they get, a traditional five. And now, they've landed that, they've landed that big time point guard, a 5-star number 17 in the nation with Bruce Thornton.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Basketball certainly is moving more positionless day by day. But if there is one position that's never going to go, it's going to stay true to itself. It's point guard. You always have to have a point guard. You have to have someone who can handle the ball, someone who can run your offense. And I think Bruce Thornton's he's certainly one of the best in the country at that. He's 6'2". He's got a real strong frame. He's a contact finisher. He can bully guys. He can score out of the post as a point guard. He's a great passer, and in his first game after committing to Ohio State, he went for 26 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, and shot 10 of 17 from the field. And obviously, it's Ohio State. They'll lose C.J. Walker by the time they have Bruce, but they'll have Michy Johnson. But Michy's a guy who can play on the wing a little bit. He can play as a combo guard, and I think Bruce is a guy who really knows how to run an offense. He's got a really high IQ, and when he needs to, he's a guy who I think you can say, all right, here's your matchup, take him one-on-one and get me a bucket. I think that's going to be something that's really big for Ohio State when he steps in, because that's something they've lacked early on this year so far.
And you talk about Michy Johnson. We'll get to him in a couple of minutes. But let's look at this 2022 class. They've got 3 guys in the fold right now. Obviously, nobody is signed. They go back to May, and they get Bowen Hardman out of Cincinnati, and then earlier this month, they get Roddy Gale out of Niagara Falls, and now Bruce Thornton. So, what's your assessment of the class that they have so far? And we'll stop there before we dovetail into the next part of that question.
I think they're doing a great job with this class so far. I would have to check, but I think they're the only program in the country with 3 commits. I think Michigan State's the only other one with more than 1, and they have 2. They're number 2 on the 2022 Rivals team rankings, only to Michigan State, and that doesn't bother me at all, considering that Michigan State has Amani Bates. But I also think that I don't think Amani Bates is going to play college basketball. So, Bowen Hardman, he's a guy they landed from Cincinnati. He's an in-state kid who can really shoot the ball, which is something that they really need. He reminds me of Justin Ahrens, but with a little bit more of a game where he can attack guys off the dribble. He's a long 6'4", and the thing that I think is really important with Bowen is I think he's an Ohio State kid through and through. I think we don't have to worry about him going anywhere. He's a Buckeye to the end, and he'll certainly be a great addition. He's more of a project guy. I don't know if he's a guy that you can plug in right away, but down the road he can really affect the game with his shooting. He's one of the best shooters in the entire state. And then Roddy Gale, who they landed out of Niagara Falls, he's one of the top wings in the country. He number 54 in the 2022 Rivals rankings. His game reminds me a lot of Malachi Branham. He's long, 6'5". He can score from all 3 levels. He can hit shots from the perimeter. He can score in between, and he can certainly finish. And he's got a lot of athleticism. He's a guy who can defend a couple positions on the wing, and he's a big addition. He's certainly a guy that could see time as a freshman whenever that time comes. And then obviously we just touched on Bruce, one of the best point guards in the country. Can't really ask for a better landing there. But Ohio State, they still, obviously the way things should be right now, they should have 2 scholarships remaining. You never really know with all the new rules coming about with all extra eligibility and everything. But they're certainly going to continue to try to pursue a big man, especially if they don't land one in 2021. I think regardless, they're going to continue to pursue one in 2022 anyways. Sean Phillips is a guy to definitely keep an eye on. He plays with Amani Bates at Solani Prep Academy. He's actually from Dayton. He went to Dayton Belmont before transferring to Ipsy Prep prior to this season. He's a guy to keep an eye on. He's got a lot of interest in. He seems to enjoy every in-state program. He's got a lot of interest in Dayton and Ohio State. He's got a lot of national attention as well. And then Joe Herrlbert is a guy I would also keep an eye on. He's the first prospect Ohio State's ever offered from North Dakota under Coach Holtman. So he's a 6'10" big. He's a true big man. Can really do it all. Can stretch the floor and knock down shots on the perimeter as well. So I would certainly keep an eye on them looking to land another big man. And even honestly, if they ended up filling up the class to 5, I could see them pursuing another wing as well.
And you really jumped into my question there about kind of what's next. So I mean, this 22 class already, I mean, and it's early, but, already sitting number 2 in the rivals team rankings behind Michigan State. And, that, again, that's subject to change in terms of, the jewel of that class may never see a collegiate gym. And, there certainly are some names there for Ohio State to kind of look at. I'm going to take us off a little bit, and I'm going to, just jump back to 21 really quick, just because you're so well versed in the state of Ohio. And you talked about Branham, and and then the other commit they have there is Kayla Netzler. They certainly have been able to do something that maybe Thad Matta kind of got away from toward the end of his run at Ohio State, and that's really identify guys from within the state and keep these guys from going to Big Ten foes, or maybe to like a UD or Cincinnati or somebody like that. I mean, when you put together the names from 21 and 22, and again, we're going to take Michy Johnson off the table for another minute. What is your impression of how Ohio State's been able to kind of mix the in-state and out-of-state?
Obviously, for the 21 guys, they're both in-state at this point, and Malachi Branham's obviously a kid who's originally from Columbus before he moved to Akron for high school and went to St. Vincent St. Mary's. And I definitely think, that's something that I think Coach Matta might have gotten away from a little bit, but I think Coach Holtman's doing a great job there because when you look at guys like Caleb and Andre Weston, obviously Caleb was one of the better recruits in his class. He was Ohio State's best player for a couple of years, but even a guy like Andre, he's a guy who's going to come here and he's going to be here for 4 years. He's going to work hard for everything he has, and he's going to love being a Buckeye. So I think that's something that a lot of people might overlook. That's really big in recruiting because obviously in the past years there's been guys like Luther Muhammad, AJ Harris, Jaquan Lyle, Mickey Mitchell. I mean, I could go on and on about out-of-state guys who've been at Ohio State for a year or two and then left. So obviously, Coach Holtman, they've been doing a great job at that. I think even Bowen Harbin's kid, who they might have surprised some kids when they offered, but I think down the road he's certainly a kid he's got the potential to play in the Big Ten. So I think it's a great thing for them to go after him early. And certainly they're doing a great job mixing in out-of-state recruits as well. But I think the fact of the matter is when you're going after five-star prospects like Bruce Thornton, for example, and I think they're doing a great job of keeping a kid like Sean Jones in their back pocket, where I think if they didn't land Thornton, I think if you offer Sean Jones, he commits within a month. Obviously, he's out of the picture now, but that's something that I think is so vital because the state of Ohio really has so many great high school basketball players. And the fact that Ohio State's really emphasizing landing the top ones is huge because obviously if you get a kid like Luke Kennard and Duke comes in and offers, I mean, there's not much you can do. But there's kids like Malachi Branham where he's a top 30 player. He doesn't really have any blue blood offers. I mean, I think that's a kid that you absolutely have to land. And then when you find kids like Kayla Netzler and Bowen Hardman, who are some of the best prospects in the state, but maybe don't have as much attention as Branham, I think those are kids that are vital to land too. So I think they've been doing a fantastic job there, and then they've been mixing in some pretty high-profile kids from out of state too. So I really like what they've been doing.
You're listening to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by our basketball recruiting insider, Jake Spiegel, and we are talking Ohio State basketball. I guess getting to the main subject, Ohio State 2-0 this year, open up with a pretty convincing win in game one and then kind of get taken to the brink a little bit by UMass Lowell on Sunday. But, they passed that test and we're seeing teams left and right with, these quote unquote bye games who are not necessarily getting past the test. Kentucky got dumped. UVA got dumped. I mean, there are a lot of things there. I mean, what are your impressions of what you've seen through two games in, again, we talk about it in football. We have to talk about it in basketball as well, too. A very weird run up to the start of the season. There were no secret scrimmages. Practices were very different. So, I certainly would not be surprised with teams kind of getting off to some, mixed results to start.
Yeah, that certainly doesn't surprise me considering the funky start to the season we've had. Obviously, there's no scrimmages or preseason exhibitions or really anything along the sort. So that's why it doesn't really shock me to see a team like Kentucky fall to a team like Richmond, just considering that you take Kentucky, they got some of the best prospects in the country, BJ Boston, Devin Askew, but those kids are freshmen. They've never played a college basketball game. And then you look at Richmond, that team's full of seniors. Those kids they've been there before. They've played college basketball for 3 years, and not having exhibitions, not being able to go live against fellow college competition, I don't think really hurt them. But I think that's a big part of why Ohio State was able to hold on yesterday. They've got a lot of experience, but yeah, the Buckeyes they've been off to a good start. Obviously, they rolled over Illinois State in their first game before yesterday's game. I think scared a lot of people, but I'm glad it happened because I hope people weren't expecting Ohio State to play lights out offensively like they did against Illinois State every game. Obviously, I think the one big question that was the big question last year too is who's going to be our shooter? Who's going to knock down shots from the perimeter for us? Ohio State shot 4 of 18 from 3 yesterday. Obviously, Justin Ahrens is a guy who's a shooter, but when you put him in, he's a shooter. He's not much of a defender. He's a bit of a liability on the other end. So I think that's certainly something that they have to figure out. Justice Sewing's he's been pretty impressive, especially in game one. He struggled a little bit yesterday, but I think what Ohio State really lacks is that go-to guy where they can just throw him the ball and say, all right, go get us a bucket, which I think Sewing's definitely got the potential to be that guy. He looked like it in the first game. But truly, I think that guy that they're missing is Seth Hounds. Obviously, he hasn't played in 2 years. I don't know when he's going to play. It's the weirdest injury situation I've ever seen in my life. But Seth, he was Ivy League Player of the Year in 2017-18. And I remember actually watching Seth when he was in high school. And there's not a lot of guys in college basketball who can score the ball like Seth Hounds and the number of ways that he can score it. And I think obviously Ohio State's going to be fine without him. They're going to compete with everyone in the Big Ten. They're going to beat some of the best teams in the Big Ten. But I think a guy like Seth who can shoot the ball from the perimeter and who can go get his own shot and really create offense for others, I think he's really going to be the difference maker. But then also been impressed with Zed Key as a freshman. He's not really a guy who I expected to step in right away and give Ohio State valuable minutes, but he played a lot yesterday. He looked really good. He looked good against Illinois State as well. So I also think playing at the Covelli Center, I think the backdrop could certainly mess with guys shooting the ball. So I'm not too worried about the Buckeyes. I think they've been off to a good start. I think they're a tournament team this year for sure, and I think they're building in the right direction. I think they're just going to continue to get better and better every year.
And news that came out earlier on Monday morning is that the Buckeyes will be back at the Covelli Center on Wednesday against Morehead State. That game I think was originally scheduled for Value City Arena, but we got a notice that they will play at the Covelli Center. Doesn't change the plans of any fans since there are no fans there. But you talk about them getting Seth Hounds back at some point. The hope was December. I guess we'll kind of just have to see what's there, but they're also going to be adding another piece at the start of the next academic term, and that's getting Michy Johnson, who reclassified. I mean, obviously, it's going to be kind of a drinking from a fire hose situation as he tries to immediately get ready to jump into Big Ten play. But, what could Ohio State fans expect to see if Michy's able to make a rapid progression?
Yeah, so Michy Johnson, he's one of the most talented high school guards in the country. He's not technically high school anymore, especially before he tore his ACL as a junior. He's electric. He he can really score in a number of ways. But he's come back after that injury. I think he looks better than ever. He looks stronger than ever. He's able to do everything offensively, and he looks like he's really defending at a higher level now, which is key. Obviously, I don't think Michy's a kid who's going to plug right into the system and play right away. Will we maybe see him here or there for a few minutes? I think it's possible. I also think it's possible he could redshirt this year. But the key, I think, is Michy getting to play behind guys like Jimmy Sotos and C.J. Walker and Dwayne Washington, where he's going to be able to gain experience in the system and practice every day. He's going to get to go against those guys every day. And then I think he'll be a guy who'll be ready to start or to step into the starting lineup or definitely play a key role regardless next year. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Michy progresses. He's an extremely hard worker. His dad, Michy Sr., and his uncle Sonny, they have Michy in the gym 24/7. So I have no doubt that he'll be a key contributor for Ohio State at some time. Will it be this season? I don't know, but it's certainly for the best interest of both he and Ohio State that he came this year. He has 5 years of eligibility now, and it'll definitely prepare him a lot better for next season than it would be if he stayed in Cleveland and was playing Shaker Heights and whatnot.
Any other final thoughts on anything as we're getting here toward the end of the show, of anything that we did not discuss? We don't get to talk enough basketball on the show. I know there is a very strong and ravenous fan base out there that wants to talk more, so I'm going to take every bit of an advantage here that I can to pick your brain on everything. Any other final thoughts that you have, maybe?
I would say in terms of 2021 recruiting, obviously that's still on the table. I would keep an eye on, obviously Ohio State's just pursuing big men in that class at this point. I'd keep an eye on Charles Bediako and Efton Reed. I think Ohio State's they've got their best odds to land one of those two guys. And then obviously the big name to keep an eye on heading forward is Chet Holmgren. He might, and a lot of people are starting to think he's a better prospect than Amani Bates, so he might be the best prospect we've seen in 10 or 15 years. He's 7 foot tall. He dribbles like a point guard. He shoots the ball like Kevin Durant at the high school level. And he can really do everything at 7 foot tall, which makes him so vital. But I don't know about Ohio State's odds landing him. I think he's going to end up at Gonzaga. Can't exactly blame him for joining the best program in the country, but I would definitely keep an eye on Charles Bediako and Efton Reed. Those are two guys Ohio State certainly has a chance. Or not Efton Reed, Charles Bediako. Efton Reed's committed to Oregon at this point. Charles Bediako and Frank Cabernet. And so I would certainly keep an eye on those guys. Ohio State certainly has a chance at them going forward. Other than that, I'm just excited to see how the season plays out. Hopefully see a return of Seth. If not, I'm just excited to watch the team regardless. Really like where Coach Hogan's got the program going, both on the floor and in terms of recruiting. So excited to see where it goes.
And there you have it. I want to thank Jake for being part of the show, and I want to thank you for being part of the show as well, for listening. It's the BIA podcast. We try to hit it 3 times a week with no football game last weekend. It was kind of weird. I want to thank Bill Bender for being part of segment 1 as well from the Sporting News, and we will talk to you here on the BIA very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with BuckeyeGrove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.